All right, I think it's pretty cool because that was the entirety of Monochrome, pretty much. So let me give you a few tips for making a good slideshow video. This is more, not really technical stuff, more things that I've certainly observed, and of course it's opinionated, so you might find differently. Nevertheless, I think one thing to remember is that everything is short-lived. So we have to definitely be okay with not over-engineering stuff and stuff such as using hard-coded contents, because most of the time we're never going to touch a scene again, so it doesn't really make sense to over-engineer. That being said, I definitely recommend whenever you have complex logic to abstract that away. I try to make functions as easy to create as possible for this reason. But again, it's it's something that you should do when you feel it's necessary, but not something you should worry about. All right. Also recommend using resources effectively. I tried to make the documentation highlight which meshes are important. So for example, when we have geometric meshes, it's not that the annulus is useless, but I think that you use circle, square, and rect so much more that you should focus on those. And this makes it hopefully somewhat easy to learn. Okay. Oops. Okay. Then another thing is that tags are very, very useful. Other thing about tags is that from experience, I think it's not even that hard to write tags yourself, write good tags yourself, but maybe understanding other people's tags could get a bit confusing. But thankfully, I think for most people, they'll work on scenes alone, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But that sort of relates to point number one as well. Okay, definitely create lots of functions for meshes. There are times where you have to create functions for animations, and we saw a few of those in the parallel animations case. But more often than not, you have to create more functions for meshes. And if you create a very cleverly calculated functor, if you do the interpolation right, that'll help save the day of majority of the times. Again, this is somewhat of a guideline. Definitely, there's a lot of times to use animations, but I think there's more times to use it for function or for meshes. All right, if you want to actually design things, I think it's good to break down complex animations as a parallel and sequential subcomponents. And then we have to think about how, for each subcomponent, how can I frame this as a state transition? Okay, so we have a very complex scene. So let's take actually a look at the intro video, for example. So the intro video, I have a relatively complex scene, but if I can break it down into its constituent components, that's gonna help a lot. So over here, I actually talk about this a bit if you're interested in the write up here, but over here, there's a few things going on. We have to do the initial introduction, that's not that hard. Then over here, okay, the main animation might seem a bit complex at first, but if we break it down, it does become a lot more approachable. Well, for one, we have the camera movement. Two, we have the graph and the color grid. They're doing some things, and I guess yeah, we also have to have the actual introduction of Mario. Okay, so the camera movement isn't actually that hard because there's a dedicated library function for this. The other thing though is that we need to have the grid animation. The grid, or sorry, not the grid animation, the graph. The graph is probably what seems the hardest. But again, if we can break that mesh down into primitives and operators, that becomes a lot easier. So in particular, the we have the point. We have to think about its vertex set, and we have to think about its color set. And the point set, we can just think about, oh, that's just an easy parametric surface. And then the color set, oh, that I can just use color map for this. And if I change those operations, suddenly it becomes a lot more approachable. And now I can use some transform operations, and just like that, we have the entire animation for the graph. Okay, and if I could put it in parallel with the camera lerp, we basically have the entire thing. Okay, obviously that was more very high level, so definitely read the thing if you're more interested in the details. But hopefully, the idea is that if you break down complex animations into its constituent parts, things will become a lot easier. All right. Okay. Um, I'm not sure how true this last one will be in the future, but I think that if you have very, very, very large, very long, it might be helpful to break down scenes into multiple files just because it helps out with caching. Hopefully I can make this so that hopefully I can make this less of an issue in the future. But for nothing. Okay. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Okay. I think that's probably a good list, but might be more to add. Oh, maybe one final thing is that I'm very active on Discord, so if you ever need help, I'm definitely open to that. Okay, some idioms that I think are useful is that using right key. Right key is basically an enumerate function, but I think what a lot of languages miss is that whenever you do enumerate, it's usually going to add the index at the left, right? So that's what I call left key. But this is not, I mean, it's not bad, but it's somewhat more natural to have the index on the right because then it's helpful when you want to do sorting. So in particular, if you've ever done sorting and then, for example, in C++, you would do a vector of pair of ints, and then the second element of the pair would be the index so that you could backtrack the sorting. This right key basically does all of that for you. Alright, monocurl doesn't have boolean or integer types, so you have to use 1 and 0 for booleans, and then integers you'll just have to do rounding when necessary. There is a lot of other stuff that's kind of minimal that you might have to get a workaround. For example, there's no break statement, there's no return statement. A lot of this might change in the future, but for now, just have to have some workarounds. I think in practice it's not that big of an issue. Excuse me. Okay, vectors are extremely important in monocurl as well, and get comfortable using plus equals. So we see a lot how they're useful for meshes and animations, but they can also be used to do things such as generating lot text strings. Okay, and then dictionaries are insertion order guaranteed. That's useful for creating gradients, and we can actually see that again in the intro video. Okay, just to compare to some alternatives, I think you should definitely explore alternatives just to get a feel of how it is. So I think on the plus side, Monocurl is capable of making slideshows. I don't know of any other application, I'm sure there is, where you could do so in a programmatic way. It's possible that there is, but I think that this is one good selling point. I also I'm pretty happy with how the animation system turned out. But of course, there's a million different ways to do things. There's lots of other ways that animation could done. So if you enjoy other ways to do that, definitely feel free to explore. Okay, on the other hand though, monocurl is in beta, so I think for now, because it's in beta, the biggest things that you're going to be missing out is that, for one, you have less control over the overall looks, and because it's a custom language, we don't have general access to our programming runtime. So for example, if you wanted to solve a differential equation, you wouldn't really be able to do that in monocurl automatically, versus if you're doing that in Python, that'd be pretty easy. There's a million different libraries to do that for you. Okay, monocurl is generally slower. I think I'm very, very confident I can get performance up probably 2 orders of magnitudes in the future. I'm very confident on that. But as it stands right now, the performance is pretty bad. But again, I know that if I can change some stuff, I could definitely improve performance. A lot of the performance quirks are just based on how I initially envisioned it and how it evolved, and because of that divergence, some of the stuff that's currently in the render engine is extremely inefficient. But yes, that's something I definitely know I can get in the future. Alright, but anyways, definitely feel free to reach out if you need any help. I'm active on Discord. And yeah, that's it for me.